They threw my vintage suitcase onto the icy driveway as if clearing out old garbage. My mother told me to call an Uber while my father stood by smoking his cigar, completely unbothered that his daughter was being banished into a winter storm. They had no idea that by midnight, a $46 million wire transfer would hit my bank account, or that the next morning I would wake up to 83 missed calls from the very people who just discarded me. My name is Olivia, and at 33 years old, I thought I knew how low my family could go. I was wrong. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to walk away from toxic relatives who only valued you when it was convenient for them. Trust me, you will want to hear how this cold night turned into the ultimate payback. The crisp Connecticut wind whipped across my face as the brass latch of my leather suitcase snapped open against the frozen concrete. My clothes spilled onto the snow. I knelt down, my fingers numb gathering my sweaters, while my mother Patricia stood on the wraparound porch, pulling her cashmere shawl tighter around her shoulders. "It is just business, Olivia," she said, her voice completely stripped of warmth. "Harrison and Naomi need the guest house. Their real estate fund is expanding rapidly, and they require a temporary headquarters. You cannot expect to camp out in our backyard forever. You are 33. It is time you stand on your own 2 feet. I slowly stood up, brushing the snow off my jeans. "Camp out?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "I have paid the property taxes on this entire estate for the last 5 years, Mom. I covered the roof repairs last spring. I pay the utilities. You and Dad have been living off my payments while playing country club socialites." My father Richard stepped out from the heavy oak front door, a lit cigar clamped between his teeth. Behind him stood my younger brother Harrison and his wife Naomi. Naomi leaned against the doorframe, her sleek designer coat draped perfectly over her shoulders. Coming from a prominent local political family, she always looked at me with a familiar mix of pity and amusement she reserved exclusively for people she deemed beneath her. "Do not speak to your mother that way," my father growled, exhaling a thick cloud of smoke into the freezing air. "You are calculating pennies with your own brother. Harrison is building an empire. Naomi brings valuable connections to this family. What do you do, Olivia? You are a freelance computer typer. You click buttons in the dark all day. We need this space for real business, not your little hobbies. We really appreciate your understanding, Olivia," Naomi said, her tone dripping with fake sweetness. "Harrison is just under so much pressure right now, managing millions of dollars. The least you can do is support him. I am sure you can find a nice little apartment somewhere closer to the city, somewhere more suited to your income bracket." Harrison smirked, spinning the keys to his leased Porsche around his index finger. "Yeah, sis, you can finally get out of my shadow. Do not worry, I will have my assistant send you a list of affordable studios. Now wrap it up, the movers are bringing our office desks in at 8 tomorrow morning." I looked at the 4 of them, a united front of delusion and arrogance. For years I had been the family ATM, the quiet scapegoat who funded their lavish lifestyle while they worshipped my brother. They thought I was just a low-level data analyst. They did not know I spent the last 5 years quietly co-founding a financial security startup. And they certainly did not know that our final acquisition papers were signed exactly 3 hours ago. "Fine," I said, softly snapping my suitcase shut. "I will get out of your way." I turned my back on them and walked down the long, icy driveway toward the main road, just as the headlights of my Uber pierced the falling snow. I climbed into the back seat, shivering, and pulled out my phone. The screen lit up with an email from my business partner. "The deal is closed," it read. I opened my banking app, watching the loading circle spin for a brief second before the new balance appeared. Wire transfer cleared. Current balance $46 million. I leaned my head against the cold window of the car as the driver navigated the treacherous winter roads heading toward the city. The heat blasted from the vents, but the real warmth came from the glowing screen in my hand. $46 million. It was a number so large it felt abstract, yet it represented every sleepless night, every skipped meal, and every moment I spent enduring my family and their relentless belittling. I did not shed a single tear for the parents who just threw me out. Instead, I felt a strange, overwhelming sense of peace. "Where to miss?" the driver asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "The Four Seasons," I replied without hesitation. "And please take your time." When I arrived at the grand entrance of the hotel, the doorman rushed forward with an umbrella. I walked straight to the reception desk, my snow-dampened clothes a sharp contrast to the marble and gold lobby. "I need your best room," I told the impeccably dressed clerk. "The presidential suite, if it is available." He looked at my battered suitcase for a fraction of a second before composing himself. "Of course, ma'am. Let me check." 5 minutes later, I swiped my new metal card and a pair of heavy double doors opened to a sprawling suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering skyline. I did not celebrate. I did not order expensive champagne or post a cryptic photo on social media. I simply walked into the massive marble bathroom, stood under the steaming rain shower until my skin turned pink, and then crawled into the center of a king-sized bed, topped with Egyptian cotton. I turned my phone on silent, tossed it onto the nightstand, and fell into the deepest, most uninterrupted sleep I had experienced in over a decade. I was finally free. No more covering my father's reckless gambling debts, disguised as bad investments. No more paying for the country club memberships they used to parade Harrison around to wealthy investors. I was completely detached. The morning sun was aggressively bright when I finally opened my eyes. The plush hotel robe felt like a warm embrace as I walked over to the windows, taking in the panoramic view of the city buzzing below. I felt brand new. I walked over to the nightstand and picked up my phone to check the time. My heart skipped a beat, but not out of fear. The screen was flooded with notifications. I stared at the lock screen in pure disbelief. I had 83 missed calls. 30 of them were from my mother, 25 from my father. The rest were a frantic mix from Harrison and Naomi. This was the same family that had literally watched me shiver in a snowstorm less than 12 hours ago, without an ounce of remorse. I unlocked the phone and tapped on the voicemail icon. The first message was from my mother, her voice trembling with an exaggerated, breathless urgency. "Olivia, honey, please pick up. We are so worried about you. The roads were so dangerous last night. Your father and I barely slept. Please call us back. We want you to come home for breakfast." "Harrison is making pancakes," I scoffed, deleting the message instantly. I tapped the next one. It was Naomi. "Hey, sister? Listen, I think things got a little heated last night. You know how stressful the real estate market is right now. Harrison feels terrible. We all want to sit down and talk about the future. Call me back the second you get this." Then there was one from my father. "Olivia, it is Dad. Your mother is sick with worry. We are a family, and family sticks together. Call me immediately." They did not care about the snowstorm. They did not care that I had nowhere to go. Something else had happened. Something massive. I sat down at the heavy mahogany desk in the corner of the suite and pulled my laptop from my bag. I connected to the hotel network and opened my web browser. I did not even have to search for my name. The Wall Street Journal homepage loaded instantly, and right there, splashed across the very top of the screen in bold black letters, was the headline: "Unknown data security startup acquired for $200 million. Co-founder Olivia's identity revealed." Below the headline was a clear professional photograph of me from a tech conference last year. The article detailed my 23% stake in the company and the immediate cash payout. I leaned back in the plush leather chair, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. They knew. The family that had treated me like a worthless charity case my entire life had just woken up to realize they threw a multi-millionaire out into the cold, and now they were desperate to reel me back in. I closed my laptop and took a deep breath. My stomach growled, a quiet reminder that I had skipped dinner the night before in the chaos of being evicted. I dressed in a simple cashmere sweater and jeans, feeling lighter than I had in years. I took the elevator down to the hotel restaurant, a stunning space with vaulted ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and soft jazz playing in the background. The hostess seated me at a quiet corner table. I was just pouring myself a cup of Earl Grey tea when a harsh, familiar voice shattered my peace. Olivia. Oh my goodness, there she is. I froze. Marching across the dining room, drawing the irritated stares of several wealthy guests, was my mother. Right behind her were my father Harrison and Naomi. I realized my mistake instantly. I was still on the family cellular plan, and I had forgotten to turn off my location sharing. They had tracked me. Before I could even stand up, my mother threw her arms around me, burying my face in her heavy floral perfume. My brilliant girl, she practically sobbed loud enough for the next 3 tables to hear. I knew you could do it. I just knew it. I gently but firmly pushed her away, keeping my voice low. What are you doing here? My father pulled out a chair and sat down without asking. We came to celebrate, Richard said, signaling a waiter for coffee, as if he owned the place. Your mother and I were just talking on the drive over. We knew kicking you out was harsh, but look at the results. Sometimes a parent has to use tough love to push their child to their full potential. You needed that fire lit under you, Olivia. You were getting too comfortable in that guest house. We pushed you out of the nest so you could fly. And look at you now. The delusion was almost impressive. They were genuinely trying to take credit for a company I had been building in secret for 5 years, all because they threw me into a blizzard 12 hours ago. Harrison did not even bother with pleasantries. He pulled up a chair, his eyes darting around the luxurious restaurant before landing on me with a hungry, desperate gleam. Naomi sat next to him, meticulously smoothing her tailored designer skirt. She offered me a tight, calculated smile, her eyes assessing the expensive china on my table. Congratulations, Olivia, Naomi said smoothly. We are all just so proud of you. It is truly a blessing for the whole family to see you finally succeed. It must be so overwhelming for you to handle this level of wealth all at once. Luckily, you have family to help you manage it. Harrison reached into his imported leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of stapled papers. He slid them across the crisp linen tablecloth right into my plate. Let us get down to business, Harrison said, tapping the document with his index finger. My real estate fund is expanding. We have a massive commercial project in the pipeline, but we need immediate liquidity to close the deal today. I have drawn up an investment contract for you. $15 million. It guarantees you a solid equity return and, more importantly, keeps the wealth inside the family where it belongs. I stared at the thick legal document, then up at my brother's arrogant face. You want me to give you $15 million after you literally forced me out of my home last night so you could use my living space as your office. Harrison rolled his eyes, leaning back in his chair, as if my eviction was a funny misunderstanding. Come on, Olivia. That was before we knew you were sitting on a gold mine. You have 46 million liquid right now. 15 million is a drop in the bucket for you. Think of it as paying mom and dad back for everything they did for you and helping your brother build a legacy. It is the least you can do. I looked at my parents. They were nodding in agreement, looking at me expectantly, as if I owed them this money. The sheer audacity of it took my breath away. For years I had funded their lifestyle, and they had given me nothing but contempt. I have paid this family back every single day for the last 10 years, I said, my voice steady and cold. The answer is no, Harrison. I am not investing a single dime into your fund. The fake smiles vanished instantly. The air at the table turned toxic. My mother gasped, clutching her pearls in exaggerated shock. Olivia, how can you be so selfish? Your own brother needs this. Harrison leaned forward, planting his hands flat on the table. All pretenses of brotherly love evaporated, and his face contorted into an ugly, threatening sneer. You think you can just walk away with that money, he hissed, keeping his voice dangerously low. You coded that software on the laptop Dad bought you in college. We paid for your food, your roof, your electricity while you built this little startup in our backyard. Legally, we own 50% of your company. You either sign this contract right now, or we will take you to court and strip you of half of everything you have. I looked at Harrison, studying the desperate vein throbbing in his neck. He was trying to intimidate me using the exact same playbook my father had used my entire life. But the terrified little girl who used to hide in her bedroom was dead. Naomi saw my expression and immediately recognized that Harrison's aggressive tactic was failing. She placed her perfectly manicured hand gently over my brother's clenched fist, playing the role of the sophisticated peacemaker. "Harrison, darling, breathe," she murmured smoothly, her dark eyes shifting to me with a calculated warmth. "Olivia, you have to forgive him. He is just passionate about the family legacy. But let us look at this logically as women of the world." She leaned across the table, lowering her voice into a conspiratorial whisper. "You just came into a massive amount of money overnight. That is wonderful, truly. But in circles like the ones my family operates in, wealth is only half the equation. Reputation is everything. You are a newly minted tech founder. The last thing you want right now is a messy public family lawsuit splashed across the tabloids. My father knows every judge and newspaper editor in this state. If the narrative becomes that you abandoned the parents who sacrificed everything for you, your new Silicon Valley investors will run for the hills." She sat back, adjusting her silk blouse with a confident smirk. "Think of this 15 million, not as a handout, but as reputation insurance. You pay it, and we welcome you into high society with open arms. We protect you." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my Earl Grey tea, letting the silence stretch between us. The sheer manipulation was breathtaking. They were literally trying to extort me over breakfast. I set my cup down on the saucer with a soft clink. Just then, our waitress approached the table holding a small black leather book. "Will that be all for this morning?" she asked politely. My father reached into his suit jacket, puffing out his chest. "I will take that," he announced, pulling out his gold-embossed credit card to maintain his patriarch facade. "Actually," I said, raising my hand to stop the waitress, "I will cover their bill. Put it on my room tab." My mother scoffed, looking highly offended. "Do not be ridiculous, Olivia. We are not a charity case. We can afford our own breakfast." Naomi let out a short, condescending laugh. "Honestly, Olivia, it is just a few $100s. Do not try to flaunt your new money by buying us pancakes. We are perfectly fine." I locked eyes with Naomi, my expression completely flat. "Are you sure about that, Naomi? Because your platinum card was declined at the Prada store 3 blocks away at exactly 8:15 this morning. I figured you guys might be hungry since you clearly cannot even afford a pastry right now." The blood drained from Naomi's face so fast she looked physically ill. Her jaw dropped, and she quickly glanced at Harrison, whose eyes widened in panic. My parents sat completely frozen, the smugness evaporating from their features. How Naomi stammered, her polished facade cracking instantly. "How could you possibly know that?" I smiled, leaning forward to rest my elbows on the table. "You forgot what I do for a living, Naomi. I am a risk data analyst. The security software my company built, the one that just sold for $200 million, is integrated into the payment processing systems of over 40 luxury retail chains. It flags anomalous credit rejections to prevent fraud. I still have back-end access. When I saw my sister-in-law try to run a $1,200 pair of shoes on 4 different maxed-out credit cards this morning, I got curious." Harrison swallowed hard, his face turning an ashen gray. He tried to speak, but no words came out. So I continued, my voice sharp and unwavering. "I decided to do a little deep data sweep on this highly successful real estate fund of yours, Harrison. Public records, shell company registrations, loan defaults. It is amazing what you can find when you know where to look." I picked up the thick, stapled investment contract Harrison had slid across the table earlier and ripped it cleanly in half. "Your fund is not expanding, Harrison. It is bleeding out. You are drowning in high-interest debt, and your investors are demanding their returns. You do not want 15 million to build a legacy. You want 15 million to stop yourself from going to federal prison." The silence at the table was deafening. The jazz music playing in the background suddenly felt entirely out of place against the sheer terror radiating from my family. I stood up, dropping the torn pieces of the contract onto Harrison's untouched plate. Enjoy your breakfast. It is the last thing I will ever pay for. I turned and walked away, the click of my heels echoing sharply against the marble floor. I was halfway across the grand lobby heading toward the elevators when a man in a cheap gray suit stepped directly into my path. Olivia? He asked, holding a thick manila envelope. Yes, I replied cautiously. You have been served, he said, pressing the envelope into my hands before turning and walking quickly toward the revolving doors. I looked down at the heavy envelope in my hands. The return address belonged to a bottom-tier law firm known for handling desperate civil disputes. I did not even need to open it to know what it was. My family had actually done it. They had filed an emergency injunction to freeze my assets. I pulled out my phone and dialed the only number that mattered right now. Good morning, Olivia, my wealth management lawyer answered on the second ring. We have a problem, I said, staring back across the lobby at my family, who were now furiously whispering among themselves at the restaurant table. They just served me. They are suing for half my company based on that old laptop. My lawyer sighed. I will file a motion to block the injunction immediately. We can tie them up in court for months. No, I said, a cold, calculating resolve settling over me. Do not just block it. I want you to initiate Operation Domino right now. Find out exactly who holds the debt for my parents' estate and buy it. All of it. Let us see how much they really love their legacy. I hung up the phone and stepped into the plush elevator, the heavy manila envelope still clutched tightly in my hand. The brass doors slid shut, silencing the soft jazz of the lobby, leaving me alone with the reality of what had just happened. My own flesh and blood had just served me with a lawsuit. Back in the quiet sanctuary of the presidential suite, I tossed the envelope onto the massive mahogany dining table. I tore it open, pulling out a thick stack of legal documents stamped with the seal of the county court. It was an emergency ex parte injunction. The plaintiffs were listed clearly in bold black ink: Richard and Patricia, my parents. I sat down and read through the filing, genuinely astounded by the sheer audacity of their claims. The core of their lawsuit was a masterpiece of fiction designed to extort me. They were claiming intellectual property theft. According to the document, because my father had supposedly purchased a computer for the family home 10 years ago, and because I lived under their roof while conceptualizing my software, they were legally entitled to 50% of my company. They were demanding the immediate freezing of my $46 million payout, pending a full trial. They had hired a notorious local law firm, the kind that advertised on billboards and specialized in harassing tech founders with frivolous lawsuits until they settled out of court just to avoid negative press. My mother and father actually believed I would hand over millions of dollars simply to make the embarrassment go away. My phone rang loudly, breaking the silence of the room. It was David, my lead attorney from a top-tier wealth management firm in Manhattan. I had sent him a scanned copy of the documents the second I walked into my suite. I am reading this garbage right now, David said, his voice laced with professional disgust. They are asking a judge to freeze your primary accounts. It is a classic shakedown tactic, Olivia. They know they do not have a real case, but they are hoping the threat of frozen assets will panic you into signing that $15 million investment contract for your brother. They think I am still the terrified girl who used to apologize just to keep the peace. I replied, pouring myself a glass of sparkling water. What is our immediate move? We have an emergency hearing tomorrow morning at 9, David explained. The judge granted a temporary 24-hour hold on your personal checking account, but your wealth management trust is completely secure. We can squash this laptop claim in 5 minutes in front of a judge. But I want to talk about this Operation Domino you mentioned on our previous call. What exactly are you planning? I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the busy city streets. Harrison runs a real estate fund, but it is entirely smoke and mirrors, David. He has been running it like a decentralized Ponzi scheme. To cover his recent massive losses, he took out a high-interest short-term loan from a shadow lender. And to secure that loan, my parents blindly signed over the deed to our family estate as collateral. The loan is currently in default. The bank is getting nervous. David was silent for a moment. I could hear the rapid clicking of his keyboard. You want my acquisitions team to buy the defaulted loan? Exactly. I said, my voice cold and steady. I do not just want to play defense in court tomorrow. I want to go on the offensive. Find the private equity group holding Harrison's toxic debt. Offer them a 10% premium to buy the paper quietly through a blind corporate trust. They will be thrilled to offload a defaulting asset. I want to be the sole owner of my parents' mortgage by the end of the week. Olivia, if we execute this, you become their direct creditor, David warned, though I could hear the sharp edge of approval in his tone. You will have the legal right to foreclose on their home, evict them, and seize Harrison's remaining corporate assets to satisfy the debt. That is the entire point, I said smoothly. My family loves to use financial leverage as a weapon to control me. It is time they learned what happens when they bring a knife to a gunfight. Get the debt, David, whatever it costs. The rest of the afternoon was spent gathering my own ammunition for the courtroom. My parents thought they were so clever using an old electronics receipt to claim my life's work. They severely underestimated a data analyst's ability to keep digital records. I logged into my encrypted cloud storage and pulled up the hardware diagnostics, the original purchase emails, and the registration history from a decade ago. I bundled the evidence into a single devastating PDF file and forwarded it to David's office. Will this work? I texted him. His reply came back less than a minute later. This is going to destroy them tomorrow. See you at the courthouse. I closed my laptop and ordered a massive overpriced room service dinner just because I could. As I ate a perfectly cooked steak overlooking the glittering skyline, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. It was my mother. See you in court tomorrow, sweetheart. You should have just given your brother the money when he asked nicely. Now you are going to lose everything. I did not reply. I just smiled, taking another sip of my water. She had no idea she was walking straight into a trap. The heavy oak doors of the county courthouse swung open the next morning exactly at 8:45. I walked through the metal detectors wearing a tailored charcoal suit, my lawyer David, walking briskly beside me. The sterile fluorescent-lit hallways were a stark contrast to the luxurious hotel suite I had left, but I felt completely in my element. Today was not about defense, it was about dismantling their illusion of control. When we entered courtroom 4B, my family was already seated at the plaintiff table. They looked like a casting call for a daytime soap opera. My mother, Patricia, was dressed in a modest beige cardigan she must have bought specifically for this occasion, her hair pulled back to look frail and exhausted. My father, Richard, wore a somber expression, while Harrison and Naomi sat directly behind them in the gallery, whispering confidently to each other. Harrison shot me a smug, victorious smirk as I took my seat next to David at the defense table. Their lawyer, a man named Mr. Higgins, whose face I recognized from cheap bus stop advertisements, was busily arranging a messy pile of folders. He looked out of his depth, just sitting in the same room as David, whose hourly rate probably exceeded Higgins' monthly retainer. All rise, the bailiff announced as Judge Miller entered the room. He was an older man with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He took his seat at the bench and adjusted his reading glasses, glancing over the emergency filing. We are here for an emergency injunction hearing regarding the freezing of assets, Judge Miller said, his voice echoing in the quiet room. Mr. Higgins, you filed this ex parte motion on behalf of Richard and Patricia. You claim the defendant, your client's daughter, committed intellectual property theft. Walk me through this. Mr. Higgins stood up, buttoning his ill-fitting jacket. Yes, Your Honor. This is a classic tragic case of a family being cast aside after sacrificing everything for their child's success. 10 years ago, my clients recognized their daughter's interest in technology. Despite facing their own severe financial hardships, they pooled their meager resources and purchased a state-of-the-art computer for her. He dramatically pulled a piece of paper from his file and waved it in the air. I have here, Your Honor, the original Best Buy receipt for an $800 laptop purchased by Richard. It was on this very machine under her parents' roof, eating the food they provided, that the defendant wrote the foundational code for her software company. a company she just sold for $200 million. They funded the seed stage of this enterprise, and legally they are entitled to 50% of its current valuation. I sat perfectly still. No emotional outbursts, no angry interruptions. I just watched my family lie under oath. Judge Miller looked at the receipt the bailiff handed him, then looked over his glasses at my mother. Patricia took that as her cue. She stood up slowly, clutching a tissue. "Your Honor," she began, her voice trembling with perfectly rehearsed emotion. "We gave Olivia everything. I used to bring her hot soup while she stayed up all night typing on that computer we bought her. We let her live in our guest house rent-free for years just so she could focus on her dream. And the moment she got her payout, she packed her bags in the middle of a blizzard and blocked our numbers. We do not want to ruin her. We just want what is fair. We want our family back." She dabbed her dry eyes and sat down. Harrison nodded solemnly from the gallery. Naomi reached over and patted my mother's shoulder. It was a masterclass in manipulation. Judge Miller turned his attention to our table. "Mr. David, your client has $46 million in liquid assets sitting in an account as of yesterday. The plaintiffs are asking for a temporary freeze until a full discovery can be conducted regarding the ownership of the intellectual property. What is your response?" David stood up slowly, exuding an aura of absolute calm. He did not yell or perform for the room. He simply picked up a single crisp sheet of paper from his leather portfolio. "Your Honor," David said smoothly, "Mr. Higgins tells a very touching story. The problem is, it is entirely fabricated. My client did not write a single line of code on the computer listed on that receipt. In fact, she never even touched it." Mr. Higgins scoffed loudly. "Objection, Your Honor. The defendant is just trying to hide behind technicalities to avoid paying her parents." David ignored him and handed the single piece of paper to the bailiff, who walked it up to the bench. "We are not hiding behind anything, Your Honor," David continued. "We did a hardware registry check on the serial number listed on that exact Best Buy receipt. That document in your hand is the official user log directly from the manufacturer." Judge Miller took the paper. The courtroom fell completely silent as his eyes scanned the page. I watched his expression shift from bored annoyance to absolute shock. His eyes widened behind his glasses, and he looked up, glaring directly at my family. Judge Miller slapped the paper down onto his desk. The loud smack echoed through the quiet courtroom, making my mother physically jump in her seat. David buttoned his suit jacket and addressed the court, his voice ringing with calm authority. "As the manufacturer logs clearly show, Your Honor, that specific computer was registered exactly 2 hours after purchase to an email address belonging to Harrison. For the next 4 years, it was exclusively used to log over 6,000 hours on various multiplayer online video games. It never contained a single line of code, let alone the proprietary algorithms my client developed." Furthermore, David continued, signaling his paralegal to hand another document to the bailiff. "This is a bank statement from 9 years ago. It shows a withdrawal of $150. My client used the tips she earned working double shifts at a local diner to purchase a refurbished desktop computer from the county library surplus sale. That broken-down machine is what she used to build her company. Her family contributed absolutely nothing but a roof, which she paid them rent for, as evidenced by the canceled checks also included in that packet." Judge Miller's face turned a dangerous shade of red. He glared at Mr. Higgins, who was desperately shuffling through his messy files, sweating profusely. Then the judge turned his furious gaze directly onto my parents. "You came into my courtroom today," the judge said, his voice dropping to a menacingly calm register, "signed a sworn affidavit, and attempted to use the judicial system to extort your own daughter out of $23 million, based on a lie so easily disprovable it borders on comedic." My mother opened her mouth to speak, tears welling up in her eyes again, but the judge raised a hand, silencing her instantly. "Do not try to cry your way out of perjury in my courtroom, ma'am," he snapped. "I have zero tolerance for frivolous lawsuits designed to harass successful individuals. This is an egregious abuse of the legal system. I am dismissing this petition for an emergency injunction immediately. Furthermore, I am dismissing this case with prejudice, meaning you cannot refile it. Harrison stood up from the gallery, his face pale. But, Your Honor, we are legally entitled to compensation. Sit down, the judge roared, pointing a sharp finger at my brother. You are entitled to absolutely nothing. In fact, for wasting this court's time and filing a fraudulent claim, I am sanctioning the plaintiff's $10,000 payable to the court within 30 days. We are adjourned. The crack of the gavel sounded like a gunshot. My father slumped in his chair, staring blankly at the wooden defense table. My mother covered her face with her hands, not fake crying this time, but sobbing out of genuine humiliation and the realization that they were now $10,000 poorer. Harrison stormed out of the gallery, his fists clenched, unable to even look at me. I stood up, adjusting my tailored jacket, and shook David's hand. Thank you, I said quietly. David smiled, snapping his briefcase shut. Operation Domino is in motion, Olivia. My team made contact with the shadow lender this morning. We should have the deed to your parents' estate by Friday. Enjoy your day. I walked out of the courtroom, feeling the heavy mahogany doors swing shut behind me. The hallway was brightly lit and mostly empty except for my family huddling near the elevators, arguing in hushed, frantic tones. I had no intention of speaking to them. I turned toward the stairwell, wanting nothing more than to head back to my hotel suite and get back to work. But before I could reach the exit, the sharp click of designer heels echoed on the marble floor behind me. Naomi stepped directly into my path, blocking the heavy metal stairwell door. Her sophisticated diplomatic facade from breakfast was completely gone, replaced by a vicious, calculating glare. You think you won, do you not? She hissed, stepping so close I could smell her expensive perfume. You think just because you embarrassed your parents in there, you get to walk away with all that money while your brother loses everything? Move, Naomi, I said flatly, not breaking eye contact. I have nothing to say to you. She did not budge. Instead, a wicked, triumphant smile spread across her face. Oh, but I have plenty to say to you, Olivia. And so does the local media. You see, society might not care about a petty legal dispute over an old laptop. But do you know what they do care about? A newly minted, greedy tech millionaire who relentlessly bullies and abuses her pregnant sister-in-law. She placed a protective, dramatic hand over her perfectly flat stomach, her eyes gleaming with malice. Wait until the press hears how the stress of your cruelty is threatening my high-risk pregnancy. Your little Silicon Valley investor friends are going to drop you like a bad habit when they see my tearful interview on the evening news tonight. Have a nice day, sis. I did not even blink as Naomi stood in the courthouse hallway, clutching her stomach with that theatrical, venomous smile. I simply stepped around her and pushed through the heavy metal doors of the stairwell, leaving her standing alone. Let her talk to the media, I thought. I had built a company on bulletproof data, not high society gossip. By 6 o'clock that evening, I realized I had underestimated the destructive power of a bored, vindictive woman with a smartphone. I was sitting at the desk in my suite, reviewing the acquisition papers for my parents' mortgage, when my phone started vibrating violently against the mahogany wood. It was Greg, the lead investor for my startup. Olivia, what is going on over there? Greg demanded the second I answered, his usually calm voice tight with panic. Our public relations team just sent me a link. It is trending everywhere, and local news outlets are already picking it up. Our board members are blowing up my phone. Calm down, Greg, I said, opening a new browser tab. What exactly is trending? Your sister-in-law, he replied sharply. Just watch the video. Olivia, we just closed a $200 million deal. We are supposed to be the golden child of the tech sector this week. We cannot have our lead founder painted as a sociopathic billionaire who terrorizes pregnant women. I hung up and clicked the link Greg had sent me. It led to a video with over 3 million views. Naomi was sitting in what looked like a beautifully decorated, albeit completely empty nursery. She wore a plain, oversized gray sweater, a stark contrast to her usual tailored designer wardrobe. Her makeup was expertly done to make her look pale and exhausted, and real tears streamed down her perfectly contoured cheeks. "I never thought I would have to make a video like this," Naomi said to the camera, her voice trembling. "As many of you know, my family has dedicated our lives to public service. We believe in lifting people up. But right now, my husband and I are facing an unimaginable nightmare. My sister-in-law, who recently came into an enormous amount of wealth, has decided to use her new power to systematically destroy our family." She paused to wipe a tear, taking a shaky breath. "She took my innocent parents-in-law to court today. She is trying to ruin my husband's business, and the stress is becoming too much." Naomi looked down gently, rubbing her stomach. "I am currently in my first trimester with a high-risk pregnancy. My doctor told me today that the relentless legal attacks and emotional abuse from Olivia are putting my baby in severe danger. We have asked her to stop, but she just laughed at us. Money changes people. Please, we just want peace." The comments beneath the video were vicious. Thousands of strangers were calling for my immediate removal from my own company. People were tagging my investors, demanding they sever ties with me immediately. Naomi had clearly utilized her wealthy political family to mobilize a public relations machine to boost the video's reach. It was a perfectly executed smear campaign designed to destroy my professional reputation. My phone rang again. It was Greg. "Olivia, we need to issue a statement," he urged. "The board is suggesting a public apology and a quiet financial settlement. Give them whatever they want to make this go away. A few million is nothing compared to the valuation of our company dropping because of a massive public boycott." "I am not apologizing to extortionists," I said flatly, "and I am absolutely not paying them a dime." "Olivia, she is a high-risk pregnant woman," Greg pleaded. "If anything happens to that baby, you will be crucified in the press." "She is not pregnant, Greg," I said, leaning back in my chair. "It is a play for sympathy. She needs public leverage because she knows her husband is completely broke." "Can you prove she is lying?" Greg asked, sounding completely desperate. "Because unless you have hard proof, the court of public opinion has already convicted you. You have 24 hours before the board forces a formal separation to protect the company." I ended the call and tossed my phone onto the desk. Prove it. Naomi had been smart to claim she was in her first trimester, a time when a pregnancy is entirely invisible and easily faked without a medical bump. But she had made one fatal mistake. She had forgotten who she was dealing with. I closed the social media tab and opened a secure encrypted terminal on my laptop. Aside from my main startup, I also provided independent cybersecurity consulting for a dozen high-end medical and cosmetic clinics across the East Coast, auditing their patient data portals for vulnerabilities. Naomi was notoriously obsessed with her appearance, and I knew exactly which elite medical spa she frequented to maintain her flawless face. I typed in my administrator credentials and bypassed the clinic's front-end firewall. I was not looking for an ultrasound or a baby. I was looking for a receipt. I filtered the patient logs by Naomi's last name and hit enter, waiting for the truth to load on my screen. The screen loaded, displaying a clean, organized dashboard of patient records. I scrolled down the list until I found Naomi's full legal name. I clicked on her file and navigated to her most recent appointments. There it was. An intake form dated yesterday morning at 10 o'clock. Exactly 2 hours before she posted that tearful video claiming she was in the fragile first trimester of a high-risk pregnancy. I downloaded the PDF and sent it directly to the local printer in the hotel business center. I finally had my ammunition. I picked up my phone and sent Naomi a single text message. "Meet me at the Oakbridge Country Club dining room at noon. We need to discuss a financial settlement." I knew the word settlement would guarantee her arrival. She thought she had won. She thought the pressure of the internet had finally broken me. I arrived at the country club 30 minutes early. I wore a tailored navy blazer and chose a table right in the center of the main dining room. It was prime lunch hour on a Thursday. The room was packed with wealthy socialites, local politicians, and the exact gossiping wives Naomi spent her entire life trying to impress. This was her sanctuary, her stage, and I was about to turn it into her personal nightmare. Naomi walked in right at noon. She was back in her expensive designer clothes carrying a Birkin bag that probably cost more than my first car. She wore an oversized pair of dark sunglasses that she removed very slowly as she crossed the dining room, ensuring everyone saw her perfectly powdered tragic expression. People at the adjacent tables immediately stopped talking, side-eyeing us, and whispering behind their linen napkins. The viral video had done its job. Everyone in the room knew who we were. Naomi reached my table and sat down heavily, letting out a long, theatrical sigh. She immediately launched into her performance, raising her voice just enough so the women at the next table could hear every word. "I am only here because my doctor advised me to eliminate all stress, Olivia," she said, placing a protective hand over her flat stomach. "Harrison is absolutely beside himself with worry. We just want to move on and protect our baby. If you are finally ready to do the right thing, sign the $15 million transfer and issue a public apology to our family. I will take the video down and call off the media." I sat back in my chair studying her. She was so confident, so utterly convinced of her own superiority. I did not say a word. I simply reached into my leather tote bag, pulled out the single sheet of paper I had printed at the hotel, and slid it face up across the pristine white tablecloth. Naomi glanced down at it, her dramatic sigh catching in her throat. "What is this?" she asked, her voice dropping a fraction of an octave as her eyes scanned the top of the document. "That is your patient intake form from the Serenity Medical Spa," I said, keeping my voice conversational but projecting clearly across the quiet dining room. Naomi's eyes darted around the room. The women at the next table had completely stopped eating their forks, hovering in midair as they blatantly eavesdropped. "I do not know how you got this, but it is a blatant violation of my medical privacy," Naomi hissed, leaning forward to grab the paper. I placed my hand firmly over the document, stopping her. "It is a receipt for 40 units of Botox and 2 syringes of dermal filler injected into your face yesterday morning," I stated, making sure my voice carried to the surrounding tables. "Any medical professional, including the one who signed that very form, will tell you that Botox is strictly prohibited for pregnant women due to the severe risk of birth defects. You signed a legal waiver on the bottom of that page, confirming you were not pregnant before they injected you." Naomi froze. The blood completely drained from her face, leaving her contoured cheeks looking hollow and ashen. "You lied to millions of people online," I continued relentlessly. "You used a fake pregnancy to orchestrate a smear campaign against me to extort $15 million. And you did it all while sitting in a luxury medical spa getting wrinkle injections." The murmurs around the dining room instantly grew louder. The wealthy women Naomi idolized were now staring at her with open disgust. The scandal was too juicy to ignore, and within hours, the truth would spread through the entire local elite community. Her fake pregnancy was entirely exposed. Her political family's pristine reputation was crumbling in real time right over the lunch service. Naomi snatched the paper from under my hand, her fingers physically shaking. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of pure hatred and absolute terror. She opened her mouth to speak, to defend herself, to spin another lie, but she had nothing left. I leaned across the table, resting my arms on the edge, and lowered my voice to a sharp whisper meant only for her. "Your little public relations stunt is over, Naomi. Now you are going to tell me exactly why Harrison's real estate fund has not filed a federal tax return in 2 years." Naomi stared at me, her mouth opening and closing silently. The confident, wealthy socialite who had walked into the country club a few minutes ago was completely gone. In her place sat a terrified woman, realizing her entire life was built on a crumbling foundation. "I do not know what you are talking about," she finally stammered, her voice stripped of its usual haughty arrogance. "Harrison handles all the business accounts. I just manage the household and our charitable foundation. I have nothing to do with the fund." "Do not play dumb with me, Naomi," I replied coldly. keeping my voice low but sharp. You are listed as a senior board member on his primary holding company. I saw your signature on the corporate registry. If his fund goes down for tax evasion and federal fraud, you go down with him, and your prominent political family will not be able to save you from a federal prison sentence. Naomi grabbed her expensive handbag, her hands shaking so violently that she knocked over her crystal water glass. The ice water spilled across the pristine white tablecloth, dripping onto her designer skirt. She did not even try to wipe it up. She pushed her chair back, the wooden legs scraping loudly against the floor, and practically ran out of the dining room. She did not look back once. I watched her flee, taking a calm sip of my sparkling water. The first domino had officially fallen, but I needed to know exactly how deep the rot went. I left $100 bill on the table to cover the spilled water and took a car straight back to my hotel suite. Once inside, I locked the heavy doors, changed into comfortable clothes, and opened my laptop. It was time to do what I do best. Data never lies, and Harrison had left a massive, careless digital footprint. I accessed public tax records, corporate registries, and property databases, linking the dozens of shell companies my brother had set up over the last 3 years. It took me less than 4 hours to untangle his financial web. When the final flowchart populated on my screen, I sat back in my chair, genuinely stunned. Harrison was not just running a failing real estate fund, he was orchestrating a massive multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. The data was terrifyingly clear. He had not acquired a single profitable commercial property in over 30 months. Instead, he was aggressively recruiting new investors using their fresh capital to pay fake dividends to his older investors to keep them quiet. He was burning through millions to maintain the illusion of success, funding his leased luxury cars, Naomi's designer wardrobe, and their extravagant vacations on the backs of unsuspecting retirees and eager entrepreneurs. But 3 months ago, the new money had stopped coming in. The market shifted, and Harrison was suddenly facing a catastrophic liquidity crisis. He needed a massive injection of cash just to prevent the entire house of cards from collapsing. I kept digging, tracing the emergency cash infusion he had miraculously secured just weeks before my parents kicked me out of the guest house. He had not gone to a traditional bank. No reputable financial institution would lend a single dollar to a fund with zero verifiable income. Instead, he had gone to a predatory shadow lender, a private equity group known in the financial sector for issuing high-interest short-term loans to desperate borrowers. They had given him a $6 million lifeline. But shadow lenders do not operate on blind trust. They demand hard, tangible collateral. I clicked on the loan origination document, zooming in on the final page of the PDF. My heart pounded against my ribs as I read the signatures at the bottom. Harrison had signed as the primary borrower, but right below his name in perfectly legible cursive were 2 more signatures: Richard and Patricia. My parents had blindly co-signed a $6 million predatory loan for my brother. And to secure that loan, they had put up the deed to our sprawling Connecticut family estate, the very house I had paid the taxes and maintenance on for 5 years. They had risked the roof over their own heads, their entire life savings, just to fund their golden child's criminal enterprise. I checked the repayment schedule. Harrison was supposed to make a balloon payment of $2 million yesterday. A payment he obviously could not make because his accounts were completely empty. That was why he was so desperate to force me to invest $15 million at breakfast. He needed my money to save himself from the shadow bank. I quickly ran a search on the shadow lender's current foreclosure filings in the state of Connecticut. The results loaded instantly, and a cold, triumphant smile spread across my face. The loan was officially in default. The shadow lender was not going to waste time dragging my family through a lengthy public court battle. Because of a specific ironclad clause my parents had foolishly signed, the lender had the right to immediately liquidate the collateral to recover their funds, without a standard foreclosure grace period. They had scheduled a quiet, closed-door commercial auction to sell the family estate to the highest corporate bidder. I looked at the date and time listed on the official auction notice. It was happening tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. My parents had absolutely no idea they were less than 24 hours away from losing the home they cherished more than anything else in the world. I picked up my phone and dialed my lawyer. David. I said the second he answered the phone. I found the debt. The estate goes to a private commercial auction tomorrow morning. I do not care how high the bidding goes. I want my corporate trust to win that auction. Consider it done, Olivia, David replied smoothly. By tomorrow afternoon, you will be the sole owner of their house. The next morning, I woke up early and ordered a pot of black coffee to my suite. I turned on the massive flat-screen television mounted on the wall and switched to the local news channel. I knew my family would not go down quietly, but watching their desperation broadcasted in high definition was truly a spectacle. There, sitting on a plush studio couch, opposite a sympathetic daytime talk show host, were my parents. Patricia dabbed at her perfectly dry eyes with a tissue, while Richard held her hand, looking somber and defeated. They were running the exact same playbook they had attempted in court, only this time, there was no judge to hold them accountable for perjury. It is just so hard to understand, my mother told the camera, her voice breaking with practiced precision. We supported Olivia her entire life. We gave her the tools to build her company. And the moment she became a billionaire, she turned her back on the very people who loved her most. She even attacked her pregnant sister-in-law. We do not want her money. We just want her to remember where she came from. The host leaned forward, looking deeply concerned. And I understand your son Harrison is doing everything he can to keep the family afloat during this heartbreaking time. Richard nodded solemnly, puffing out his chest. Harrison is a pillar of strength. In fact, despite the emotional toll this has taken on our family, he is hosting a massive charity gala at our estate this Saturday evening. He is raising funds for underprivileged entrepreneurs. He is trying to put good back into the world, unlike his sister. I laughed out loud in the empty hotel room. A charity gala. Harrison was using national television to advertise a fake fundraiser. He was so incredibly desperate for cash to pay off his shadow lender that he was willing to solicit millions of dollars from wealthy donors under the guise of philanthropy, fully intending to pocket the money to save his own skin. It was textbook wire fraud, and he was committing it on live television. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was David. Are you watching Channel 4? David asked, sounding completely unfazed by my parents' smear campaign. I am, I replied, taking a sip of my coffee. Harrison is digging his own grave on live television. Tell me you have good news from the auction house. David chuckled. The auction lasted exactly 12 minutes. The shadow lender wanted the debt off their books immediately. My acquisitions team created a blind corporate shell named Apex Data Holdings. We swooped in and bought the defaulted loan at a 10% premium. The paperwork was expedited through the county clerk's office an hour ago. I set my coffee cup down, a rush of cold satisfaction spreading through my chest. Is it official? It is ironclad, David confirmed. Apex Data Holdings is now the sole legal owner of the estate. You hold the deed, Olivia. Your parents are currently sitting in a television studio crying about a house they no longer own. And because it was a commercial foreclosure auction, you are not bound by residential eviction grace periods. You can order them to vacate the premises at your discretion. Do not file the eviction notice just yet. I instructed, my eyes locked on the television screen, where Harrison's face had just flashed in a promotional graphic for his upcoming gala. Harrison is inviting the wealthiest investors in the state to our property this Saturday night. If we evict them today, he cancels the event and scurries away like a rat. I want him to feel the walls close in. I want him trapped in a room with the very people he is trying to rob. You are letting him host the gala? David asked, intrigued. I am letting him build a stage, I corrected. I will be the one pulling the curtains down. For the next 48 hours, a high-stakes game of cat and mouse played out across the city. My parents' smear campaign intensified. They paid for sponsored articles in local magazines, painting me as a ruthless corporate monster. Naomi, terrified after our confrontation at the country club, doubled down on her social media presence. She flooded her accounts with pictures of the estate boasting about the extravagant preparations for the charity gala, desperately trying to project an image of untouchable wealth to her political family. But while they were busy managing optics, I was managing their infrastructure. I used my software access to track the vendor payments for the gala. Harrison had hired the most expensive catering company in the state, a premium event planning firm, and a private security contractor. The total cost of the event was well over $300,000. But when I checked the financial routing, I saw that Harrison had not paid a single deposit. He had issued them all net 30 invoices promising to pay them after the gala concluded, using the donations he planned to steal. I could not let innocent local businesses go bankrupt because of my brother. I called David and had him quietly wire the full payment to every single vendor under the name Apex Data Holdings. Within hours, the caterers, the event planners, and the security team all signed revised contracts, making my shell company their exclusive client for the evening. Harrison thought he was in charge, but he was essentially a guest at an event I entirely controlled. By Friday evening, the pressure on Harrison reached a boiling point. I sat in my hotel suite monitoring his bank accounts through my encrypted terminal. The ticket sales for the gala were trickling in. At $50,000 a table, he had managed to secure pledges for nearly $2 million. But pledges were not liquid cash, and he needed cash immediately to maintain his lavish lifestyle and pay off the aggressive mob-tied loan sharks he had borrowed from to fund his initial Ponzi payouts. The screen blinked, alerting me to a new transaction. Harrison had just initiated a wire transfer of $50,000 from the charity fund's holding account directly to a private offshore casino account. He was literally stealing from the charity pool before the event even started to cover a personal gambling debt. I took a screenshot of the transaction, added it to a secure digital folder, and smiled. Every move he made was another nail in his coffin. He was no longer just a failing businessman. He was committing federal fraud, grand larceny, and tax evasion, and I had the digital receipts for every single felony. Saturday morning arrived with bright, clear skies. The local news stations were buzzing with coverage of the Harrison Family Foundation Gala. Aerial footage showed massive white tents being erected on the sprawling lawns of my estate. Crystal chandeliers were being hung from the grand oak trees. It was a picture-perfect illusion of generational wealth and philanthropy. I spent the morning at a high-end boutique downtown purchasing a custom-tailored Tom Ford suit in a deep, commanding charcoal gray. I paired it with a silk blouse and stiletto heels that sounded like gunshots on a marble floor. If I was going to tear down my family's empire of lies, I was going to look flawless doing it. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I compiled all the evidence I had gathered over the past few days. The forged loan documents, the defaulted shadow bank papers, the Botox receipt exposing Naomi's fake pregnancy, and the undeniable proof of Harrison's Ponzi scheme and wire fraud. I encrypted the massive file and sent it directly to the local field office of the FBI Financial Crimes Division via an anonymous server drop. I included a brief note detailing the exact time and location of the charity gala. The trap was fully set. All that was left was to walk in and shut the door. At 7 o'clock, the sun began to set over the Connecticut hills. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my hotel suite, adjusting the cuffs of my suit jacket. My phone rang. It was the head of the private security firm I had secretly bought out 2 days ago. Ms. Olivia, the security chief, said respectfully, "The guests are arriving. Your parents and brother are currently greeting donors in the main foyer. We have secured the perimeter according to your instructions. No one leaves until you give the word." "Excellent," I replied, grabbing my leather clutch containing the single most important document of the night. "Keep a close eye on Harrison. Do not let him near the service exits. I am on my way." I took the private elevator down to the hotel lobby and stepped out into the cool evening air. A sleek black Bentley was waiting for me at the curb, its engine purring quietly. The driver opened the door, and I slid into the luxurious leather back seat. "Take me to the estate," I told the driver. As the car glided through the city streets and merged onto the highway leading to my childhood home, I did not feel an ounce of guilt. My parents had thrown me into a blizzard without a second thought. They had tried to steal my company, drag my name through the mud on national television, and use my home to fund a criminal empire. They thought I was a quiet, obedient scapegoat who would just roll over and accept their abuse. They were about to learn that when you push a data analyst into a corner, she does not just fight back. She rewrites the entire system and deletes you from the code. The massive wrought iron gates of the estate loomed in the distance, wide open to welcome the city's elite. The driveway was lined with imported luxury cars, and the sound of a live string quartet drifted through the night air. I watched the warm golden light spilling from the windows of the mansion, the house I now legally owned. The dominoes were lined up perfectly. It was time to push the first one. The black Bentley glided up the freshly paved driveway, its headlights sweeping across the meticulously manicured lawns of the estate. From the back seat, I watched the grand illusion unfold. Harrison had truly outdone himself. Massive white marquees glowed against the night sky, anchored by towering crystal chandeliers that caught the light like crushed diamonds. A fleet of valets in crisp white jackets darted around the circular driveway, carefully parking a parade of imported luxury vehicles. The soft, elegant notes of a live string quartet drifted through the cool evening air, completely masking the stench of desperation that hung over my family. I told my driver to park near the edge of the terrace, completely bypassing the valet line. I did not step out immediately. I sat in the darkness of the car, rolling the tinted window down just enough to listen. From my vantage point, the main reception area was perfectly visible through the floor-to-ceiling glass doors of the mansion. My mother, Patricia, was holding court near a towering champagne pyramid. She was draped in a heavy sapphire blue gown, her hair piled high in an elaborate updo. She was surrounded by the wives of local politicians and banking executives, laughing loudly with her head thrown back. I could hear her bragging from 30 feet away. She claimed the dress was custom-made in Paris, an exclusive piece brought over just for this charity event. But as she turned to accept a fresh glass of champagne, the fabric shifted and the stark white rectangle of a designer return tag peeked out from beneath the layers of tulle at the back of her neckline. She fully intended to return the dress on Monday morning. My father, Richard, was stationed near the outdoor cigar lounge, holding a glass of 20-year-old scotch he definitely had not paid for. He was slapping the backs of wealthy local businessmen, projecting the image of a seasoned, comfortable patriarch. He was playing the role of the generous host, completely oblivious to the fact that he was standing on property that legally belonged to the daughter he had thrown into a blizzard just days ago. Then I spotted Naomi. She was hovering near the entrance of the main tent, trying to perform damage control. After our encounter at the country club, the whispers about her fake pregnancy and the Botox incident had clearly spread through her elite social circles. She was wearing an empire waist dress designed to look like maternity wear, keeping one hand delicately placed on her stomach. But her smile was brittle, and her eyes darted nervously around the room. The society women she desperately wanted to impress were giving her tight, polite nods before quickly turning their backs to her. She looked isolated and terrified, trapped in a lie she could no longer maintain. But the main event was Harrison. I tracked my brother moving through the crowd. He looked exhausted. His tailored tuxedo could not hide the dark circles under his eyes or the frantic, desperate energy in his movements. He was not mingling for pleasure. He was hunting. He glided past the minor donors and zeroed in on his primary target for the evening. An elderly gentleman named Charles Montgomery stood near the edge of the terrace. Charles was a retired shipping magnate known in the community for his deep pockets and trusting nature. He had lost his wife a few years ago and spent most of his fortune supporting local charitable causes. He was the perfect mark for a predator like my brother. I pushed the car door open quietly and stepped out onto the gravel, standing in the shadows of the grand oak tree to listen to my brother's final desperate pitch. "It is truly an honor to have you here tonight," Charles Harrison said, his voice dripping with practiced sincerity. "This foundation means everything to my family. We believe that those who have been blessed with success have a moral obligation to lift up the next generation of entrepreneurs. Charles smiled warmly, nodding his head. Your parents must be very proud of you, Harrison. It is rare to see a young man so dedicated to philanthropy. I read the brochure you sent over. The community center you want to build sounds wonderful. Harrison placed a supportive hand on the older man's shoulder. The community center is just the beginning, Charles. We are actually integrating our charitable initiatives with our commercial real estate fund. By investing directly into the fund tonight, your capital does not just sit in a stagnant account. It actively develops local businesses, and the high-yield returns funnel straight back into the charity. It is a closed loop of generational wealth and community service. It was a masterful lie. There was no community center. There was no closed loop. There was only a shadow lender demanding a balloon payment and a group of violent loan sharks threatening to break Harrison's legs if he did not produce millions in cash by midnight. Charles looked thoroughly impressed. He reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a leather-bound checkbook. I brought my pen, Harrison. I believe we discussed a foundational contribution to get the commercial side off the ground. You said $5 million would secure the primary development site. Harrison's eyes widened, a flash of pure, unadulterated greed breaking through his polished facade. He was seconds away from securing the exact amount of money he needed to stay out of federal prison. Yes, Charles Harrison replied, his voice trembling slightly with anticipation. $5 million would make you the anchor investor. We can finalize the paperwork on Monday, but the check tonight will secure your equity position immediately. Charles clicked his expensive fountain pen and rested the tip against the crisp paper of the checkbook. He began to write out the date. It was time. I stepped out of the shadows and walked directly toward the main entrance. I was wearing a custom-tailored charcoal gray Tom Ford suit, the sharp lines and structured shoulders projecting absolute authority. My stiletto heels struck the stone pathway with a sharp, rhythmic precision that commanded attention. As I approached the grand terrace, the head of my private security detail stepped forward, raising his hand to signal the rest of his team. According to my orders, the heavy iron gates at the bottom of the driveway slammed shut with a resounding clang, locking from the outside. The trap was sealed. I walked up the wide marble steps leading into the main reception area. The live string quartet was positioned right by the entrance, playing a lively classical piece. The lead violinist happened to look up as I crossed the threshold. He recognized the cold, uncompromising look in my eyes and the sheer force of my presence. His bow faltered, producing a sharp, discordant screech across the strings. The cellist stopped playing, immediately confused by the sudden break in rhythm. Within seconds, the music died out completely. The sudden jarring silence rippled through the massive crowd. One by one, conversations stopped. Heads turned. The wealthy donors, the local politicians, and the socialites all shifted their gaze toward the entrance. The crowd naturally parted, creating a wide, clear path leading straight to the center of the room. My mother stopped mid-laugh, her champagne glass freezing near her lips. My father turned around, nearly dropping his scotch. Naomi gasped aloud, her hand flying to her mouth in genuine horror as she shrank back against the nearest buffet table. And Harrison, standing just a few feet away, with Charles Montgomery, slowly turned his head. The color instantly drained from his face. His confident smile collapsed, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. The pen in Charles's hand hovered over the $5 million check, entirely forgotten. I stood at the top of the stairs, looking down at the family that had tried to destroy me. The air in the room was electric, heavy with the terrifying realization that I was not there to attend a party. I was there to end it. The silence stretched thick and suffocating. A few of the wealthy guests exchanged confused glances, their champagne flutes hovering uncertainly. Then the whispers began. They hissed through the crowd like venom as society wives recognized me from the viral video. There she is, someone muttered. The sister. The one who attacked the pregnant wife. I kept my chin high, my expression an unreadable mask of calm, letting their judgment wash over me. Their opinions meant absolutely nothing. because none of them knew they were standing on a crime scene. My father was the first to break the paralysis. Richard shoved his way through a cluster of bank executives, his face flushing a dangerous volatile shade of crimson. He practically sprinted up the marble steps, stopping just 2 feet below me. He was breathing heavily, his scotch sloshing over the rim of his crystal glass onto his expensive shoes. "What in the hell do you think you are doing here?" he hissed, his voice trembling with barely contained rage. He kept his volume just low enough to prevent a total public spectacle, but the raw hatred in his eyes was unmistakable. "I am attending a charity gala," I replied smoothly, my voice carrying effortlessly over the quiet murmurs of the crowd. "I heard you were raising funds for underprivileged entrepreneurs. Since you threw me out into a blizzard last week with nothing but a suitcase, I figured I qualified." My mother rushed up the steps behind him, her heavy sapphire gown rustling loudly. She grabbed my father's arm, looking frantically over her shoulder at the staring guests. "Olivia, you need to leave right now," Patricia demanded in a frantic, sharp whisper. "You have already ruined enough for this family. Do not do this tonight. Harrison is finalizing a crucial partnership. You are embarrassing us in front of the entire community." "I am not the one who should be embarrassed, Patricia," I said, looking her up and down, letting my eyes linger deliberately on the white return tag sticking out of the back of her dress. "By the way, if you plan to return that gown on Monday, you might want to tuck the tag in. Charles Montgomery's wife is standing right over there and she is definitely noticing." My mother's hand flew to the back of her neck in pure horror. She stumbled backward, her face draining of color as she fumbled with the fabric, her carefully constructed illusion of wealth shattering in front of her high society friends. "That is enough," Richard barked, stepping directly into my personal space, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. The tactic might have worked when I was a teenager, but tonight I did not even flinch. He turned his head toward the entrance and bellowed, his voice echoing across the terrace. "Security! Get over here right now! Throw this trash out! She is not welcome on my property!" At the sound of my father's shout, Harrison finally snapped out of his shock. He excused himself from the bewildered Charles Montgomery and marched toward the grand staircase. Naomi trailed cautiously behind him, keeping a safe distance, her hands wringing the fabric of her fake maternity dress. Harrison climbed the steps, standing shoulder to shoulder with our father. He puffed out his chest, trying to project the authority of a successful CEO, but I could see the subtle tremor in his hands. He was terrified. He knew exactly what kind of damage I could do if I opened my mouth. "Olivia, you need to leave immediately," Harrison said, adopting a stern, patronizing tone for the benefit of the watching crowd. "We asked you respectfully to give us space after your erratic behavior this week. Crashing a charity event just to cause a scene is pathetic even for you." I looked at my brother, taking in his tailored tuxedo and his perfectly styled hair. "You really are an incredible actor, Harrison," I said calmly. "A charity event. Is that what we are calling it now? Because from where I am standing, it looks an awful lot like a desperate attempt to commit federal wire fraud before the loan sharks break your legs." Harrison's jaw dropped. His eyes darted wildly around the room to see if anyone had heard me. The color completely vanished from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. He swallowed hard, his throat clicking audibly in the quiet tension. "Security!" Harrison practically screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "Remove her, now!" 2 large men in crisp black suits stepped forward from the shadows of the entrance. They were part of the private security firm Harrison had hired, the very same firm I had quietly bought out and put on my own payroll 2 days ago. They walked up the marble steps, their faces completely impassive, and flanked me on either side. My father crossed his arms, a smug, triumphant smile returning to his face. "You pushed your luck, Olivia. Now you get to be dragged out of here like the garbage you are. Do not ever step foot on my property again." Harrison regained a fraction of his composure, leaning in close so only I could hear him. "Get out, Olivia. You are trespassing. And if you ever try to sabotage my business again, I swear I will destroy you." I looked at the 2 security guards standing beside me. They did not grab my arms. They did not try to physically move me. They simply stood there waiting for my command. I turned my attention back to Harrison, letting a slow, calculated smile spread across my lips. I reached into my oversized leather clutch and pulled out a heavy leather-bound folder. The cover was stamped with the bright red seal of a prominent commercial bank, the exact shadow lender Harrison had been dodging for months. I held the folder up, the red seal catching the light of the crystal chandeliers overhead. "Actually, Harrison," I said, my voice ringing out with absolute clarity, cutting through the silence of the room. "You are." I sidestepped the security guard, closing the distance between my brother and me. I tapped the heavy leather folder directly against Harrison's chest. "The men in the black suits you just yelled at do not work for you." I continued, my tone completely merciless. "They work for Apex Data Holdings. The catering staff serving the champagne works for Apex Data Holdings. The event planners who set up those tents work for Apex Data Holdings. Because I paid their invoices yesterday when you tried to scam them with net 30 contracts." My father uncrossed his arms, his smug expression faltering. "What are you talking about?" Richard demanded, his voice losing its confident edge. "What is Apex Data Holdings?" I kept my eyes locked on Harrison, watching the absolute terror completely consume him. "Apex Data Holdings is my private corporate shell," I stated firmly. "The same shell that bought your defaulted $6 million loan from your shadow lender yesterday morning." The murmurs in the crowd instantly died. The entire estate plunged into a deafening, shocked silence. Charles Montgomery stepped closer to the base of the stairs, his eyes wide, listening intently. "I am not trespassing, Harrison," I said, raising the folder higher for everyone to see. "Because as of yesterday afternoon, I own this mortgage. I own the deed. I own this house, the land it sits on, and every single thing inside of it. So if anyone is going to be escorted off my property by security tonight, it is going to be you." For a long moment, nobody breathed. The only sound on the terrace was the rustling of the evening breeze through the grand oak trees and the soft clinking of ice melting in unattended cocktail glasses. Then my father let out a loud, forced bark of laughter. It was a harsh, ugly sound that echoed off the marble columns. "A shell company. Buying our mortgage." "You have lost your mind, Olivia," Richard said, waving his hand dismissively. He turned to the crowd of wealthy onlookers, forcing a wide, fake smile that did not reach his eyes. "Please, everyone, I sincerely apologize for this interruption. As some of you may know, my daughter has been struggling with some severe mental health issues lately. This is just a sick joke, a very distasteful prank." Harrison eagerly jumped in, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "Yes, exactly. A prank." He turned his attention back to Charles Montgomery, his voice dripping with desperate reassurance. "Charles the First, assure you my fund is incredibly liquid. We do not have any defaulted loans. My sister is just upset because she was not invited to participate in the charity board." I did not smile. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to perform like they were doing. I simply opened the heavy leather folder and pulled out a stack of crisp, notarized documents. I bypassed my father and brother entirely and walked straight up to Charles Montgomery. I handed the top page directly to the elderly investor. "Read it, Charles," I said, clearly ensuring my voice carried to the surrounding tables. "That is the final notice of commercial foreclosure from Granite State Equity, dated 3 days ago. Harrison took out a $6 million shadow loan to cover the massive unreported losses in his real estate fund. When he defaulted on that loan, my parents signed away the deed to this exact estate to secure it. They bet their house on his lies, and they lost." Charles put on his gold-rimmed reading glasses. His face hardened instantly as his eyes scanned the official bank letterhead and the signatures at the bottom of the page. He slowly closed his leather checkbook and slid it back into his breast pocket. He looked up at Harrison, his expression shifting from confusion to absolute disgust. "This is forged!" Naomi suddenly shouted, stepping out from behind the buffet table. Her carefully crafted facade of a graceful political wife was completely gone. Her face was flushed, and she pointed a shaking finger at me. "She printed that on her little computer. She is a data hacker. She is just trying to frame my husband because she is jealous of our success. Do not listen to a word she says. I turned to Naomi, my expression completely flat. I also have the transfer of deeds stamped by the county clerk yesterday morning naming Apex Data Holdings as the sole proprietor of this address. I held up the second document displaying the official state watermarks for the crowd to see. Harrison has been running a Ponzi scheme for 2 years, paying old investors with new money. He threw this fake charity gala tonight to steal your $5 million, Charles. He needed your check to pay off the violent loan sharks he borrowed from last month. There is no community center. There is no generational wealth loop. There is only a criminal backed into a corner. Loud gasps erupted from the crowd. The wealthy socialites and bank executives physically stepped away from my family as if their sudden poverty and criminality were contagious diseases. Whispers turned into outraged shouts. People began setting down their champagne flutes and reaching for their coats. "Shut up," Harrison screamed, completely losing control. The polished CEO persona shattered into a million pieces. He lunged toward me, his hands reaching for the leather folder, but my private security guards instantly stepped in front of me, forming a solid wall of muscle. Harrison crashed into them and stumbled backward, breathing heavily, his eyes wild like a trapped animal. "Shut your mouth, Olivia. You are ruining everything. I will sue you for defamation. I will put you in jail." "You are not putting anyone in jail, Harrison," I replied coldly, adjusting the cuffs of my suit jacket. "Because you are not the one calling the shots tonight." I looked past my screaming brother and gave a subtle nod to my head of security. The tall man in the black suit unclipped the two-way radio from his shoulder and spoke a single sharp word into the microphone: "Execute." Suddenly, the tranquil Connecticut night was shattered by the piercing wail of sirens. The heavy iron gates at the bottom of the driveway, which had been locked shut minutes earlier, swung open automatically. Red and blue lights washed over the pristine white tents, reflecting off the crystal chandeliers and the terrified faces of my family. 2 local police cruisers tore up the long gravel driveway, their tires crunching loudly as they braked hard right behind my Bentley. But they were not alone. Right behind the cruisers, 2 black government SUVs, bearing the official seal of the state auditor, parked aggressively on the manicured lawn, tearing up the expensive sod. Total panic swept through the terrace. The high society guests began to scatter, murmuring in fear and confusion as 4 uniformed police officers stepped out of the cruisers, their hands resting securely on their utility belts. From the black SUVs, a team of federal financial investigators in windbreakers exited, carrying metal briefcases and stacks of empty evidence boxes. Harrison froze. The blood completely left his body. He looked at the police, then at the federal agents, and finally at me. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He knew it was over. Every fake spreadsheet, every illegal wire transfer, every stolen donation was about to be seized. My father stumbled backward until his back hit the buffet table. The crystal Scotch glass slipped from his trembling fingers and shattered violently against the marble floor, but he did not even look down. He was staring at the federal agents marching up the grand staircase. My mother grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with unimaginable terror. The reality of the situation finally crushed her carefully constructed delusion: the mansion, the country club status, the golden child son. It was all gone in the blink of an eye. She looked at me, her chest heaving as she began to sob hysterically. "What did you do? Olivia?" she cried out, her voice cracking with despair. "What have you done to us?" I looked directly at my mother, stepping closer so she could hear every single word over the wail of the sirens. "I bought the bank's bad debt. I am the sole owner of this property now." My words hung in the air, absolute and final. The flashing red and blue lights from the police cruisers cast long, erratic shadows across the terrace, illuminating the sheer horror on my family's faces. Charles Montgomery was the first to react. The elderly investor looked down at the documents in his hand, then up at the federal agents swarming the lawn. His expression hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He stepped directly toward Harrison, closing the gap between them. Before my brother could even raise his hands to defend himself, Charles reached out and violently snatched his leather checkbook right out of Harrison's trembling grip. "You are a thief," Charles said, his voice booming with the authority of a man who had built and destroyed empires. "You looked me in the eye and tried to steal $5 million to pay off a shadow loan. You are a disgrace to this community." Charles ripped the partially filled check from the binding, tore it into tiny pieces, and threw them directly at Harrison's chest. The white scraps of paper fluttered down onto his expensive tuxedo jacket like snow. That was the spark that ignited the powder keg. The wealthy guests who had been standing in shocked silence suddenly erupted. The illusion of the high society charity gala shattered completely, replaced by the chaotic reality of a massive crime scene. Investors who had already written smaller checks began shouting, demanding their money back. High-profile politicians covered their faces, rushing toward the lawn to avoid the cameras of any local news crews that might be following the police. The elegant evening devolved into a frantic, panicked stampede. Federal agents in windbreakers began moving swiftly up the grand staircase, fanning out across the terrace to secure the exits. The lead investigator, a tall man with a stern face, held up a thick manila folder. Harrison, the agent, announced, his voice projecting easily over the shouting crowd. "We have a federal warrant for your arrest on multiple charges of wire fraud, tax evasion, and operating an illegal Ponzi scheme. We also have a warrant to seize all physical and digital assets on this property associated with your corporate entities." Harrison stumbled backward, his hands raised in a desperate, pleading gesture. "Wait, please, there is a massive misunderstanding here. I can explain everything. I just need to make one phone call. My lawyer can sort this out." No one was listening to him. Two uniformed police officers stepped forward, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from their belts. Naomi watched the officers approach, her eyes darting frantically between the handcuffs, the federal agents, and the angry mob of elite socialites. I could see the exact moment her survival instinct kicked in. She was the daughter of a prominent political family. Her entire life was built on public perception and flawless optics. She knew that if she went down with Harrison, her family would be ruined, and she would spend the rest of her life in a federal penitentiary. Harrison reached out to her, his voice cracking. "Naomi, honey, call your father. Tell him to get the best defense attorney in the state down here right now." "Do not touch me," Naomi shrieked, recoiling from him as if he were covered in battery acid. Her voice was so shrill, so pierced with sudden hysteria, that even the federal agents paused. She stepped back, putting as much physical distance between herself and Harrison as possible. She pressed both hands against her fake maternity dress, tears streaming down her perfectly powdered face. "I had no idea he was doing this," Naomi screamed, turning toward the lead federal agent, desperately playing her final card. "I swear to you, I knew nothing about his business accounts. He lied to me. He lied to my family. He told me this was a legitimate charity. I am a victim here." "Naomi, what are you doing?" Harrison gasped, his eyes wide with betrayal. "You are on the board of directors. You signed the incorporation papers." "Because you forced me to," she cried out, her voice echoing across the terrace. "You manipulated me. You used my family's name to legitimize your scam. You disgust me." She reached down, grabbing her left hand. With one violent, frantic pull, she slid her massive diamond wedding ring off her finger. She drew her arm back and threw the heavy ring directly at Harrison's face. It struck him hard on the cheekbone before bouncing off the marble floor and rolling away into the shadows. "I want a divorce," Naomi declared loudly, making sure every remaining society wife heard her. She turned her back on her husband of 3 years and marched straight toward the federal agents, her hands raised in surrender, offering her full immediate cooperation to save her own skin. Harrison watched her walk away, his jaw trembling. The golden child, the brilliant CEO, the beloved son, was now completely isolated. His investors wanted his head. His wife had just publicly abandoned him. The police were seconds away from reading him his rights. In a final, pathetic act of desperation, Harrison turned to the one person who had protected him from the consequences of his actions for his entire life. He reached out and grabbed his father's arm. Dad, Harrison begged, his voice breaking into a pathetic sob. Dad, you have to do something. Call your lawyers. Tell them Olivia is lying. Tell them she forged the documents. Please, Dad, do not let them take me away. But Richard did not move. He did not pull out his phone. He did not yell at the police. He did not even look at his son. My father was standing frozen by the buffet table, his face entirely drained of color. His eyes were locked dead on me. He wasn't looking at the federal agents or the handcuffs. He was looking at the daughter he had treated like garbage for 33 years. The daughter he had banished into a winter storm. He did not care that Harrison was going to prison. The devastating reality of his own situation had just crashed down on him. Because as he stared into my cold, uncompromising eyes, Richard finally understood that he had lost the deed, he had lost the money, and he was completely, terrifyingly homeless. The words echoed across the marble terrace, hanging in the cool night air, like a death sentence. My father stood completely paralyzed, his mouth slightly open, the shattered remains of his crystal Scotch glass resting at his feet. The reality of his situation was crashing down on him in real time. He was no longer the wealthy patriarch of a prominent Connecticut family. He was a trespasser standing on my land. Down on the driveway, the police officers pressed Harrison against the hood of their cruiser. They patted him down, pulling his expensive silk tie loose before clicking the heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. He did not fight them. He just stared blankly ahead, a broken man who had finally run out of lies. The lead federal agent began reading him his Miranda rights, the monotone words cutting through the chaotic wail of the sirens. A few yards away, Naomi was already sitting in the back of an unmarked black SUV with the doors open. She was surrounded by 2 federal investigators nodding frantically as she gave them her statement. She was throwing my brother under the bus with ruthless efficiency, trading his freedom for her own immunity. She did not look at him once as the officers pushed Harrison into the back of the squad car and slammed the door shut. As the police cruiser reversed down the driveway and disappeared into the night, the true dismantling of my family's empire began. From the back of the second government vehicle, a team of 6 asset auditors stepped out. They did not wear police uniforms. They wore sharp, sterile business casual attire, carrying metal clipboards, digital tablets, and thick rolls of brightly colored barcode stickers. They moved past the abandoned buffet tables, ignoring the half-empty champagne flutes and the discarded designer jackets left behind by the fleeing guests. Their faces were entirely devoid of emotion. They were not there to arrest anyone. They were there to liquidate. The lead auditor, a woman with sharp features and a tight bun, walked directly up to me. She glanced at the red-stamped foreclosure documents I was holding and gave a brisk professional nod. Ms. Olivia, the auditor said clearly, "We have received the expedited authorization from the county clerk and the federal bankruptcy court. All physical assets on this property are now legally bound to Apex Data Holdings to satisfy the defaulted commercial debt. We will begin the inventory tagging process immediately." I handed her the folder. "Proceed," I replied. The auditors spread out across the terrace and marched straight into the mansion. It was a breathtaking display of clinical efficiency. Within seconds, the lead auditor walked over to the towering outdoor champagne pyramid. She did not admire it. She simply peeled a bright yellow barcode sticker from her roll and slapped it directly onto the base of the crystal structure, scanning it into her tablet with a sharp electronic beep. My father snapped out of his trance at the sound. He turned around just as 2 male auditors walked into his beloved outdoor cigar lounge. One of them began placing yellow stickers on the imported leather armchairs, while the other picked up a humidor filled with vintage Cuban cigars. "Hey, Richard," barked, his voice cracking with panic as he rushed toward them. "What are you doing? Put that down. That humidor is worth $10,000. Those are my personal belongings. You cannot just come into my house and touch my things." The auditor did not even look at him. "Sir," he said in a flat, bored tone, "this property and all its contents have been seized to satisfy a commercial debt. If you interfere with the auditing process, I will have the federal agents outside arrest you for obstruction of justice. Step back." Richard recoiled as if he had been physically struck. He spun around and marched toward me, his face twisting into a mask of desperate rage. He pointed a trembling finger at my face. "Call them off, Olivia," he demanded, trying to summon the booming authoritarian voice he had used to terrorize me my entire life. "Call them off right now. You have made your point. You embarrassed Harrison. You ruined the gala. But this is my house. I built this life. You are not going to let a bunch of strangers slap price tags on my furniture." I looked at him completely unbothered by his anger. "You did not build anything, Richard. You inherited a comfortable life and then you gambled it away to fund your golden child's criminal enterprise. You signed the deed to this house over to a shadow bank because you cared more about maintaining a fake image of wealth than you cared about financial security. These auditors are not touching your things. They are touching my things because I own them now." He stepped closer, his chest heaving. "I am your father. You cannot do this to your own family. We will sue you. We will take you to court and expose exactly how you stole this property from us." I tilted my head, studying him with cold amusement. "Sue me with what money? Your bank accounts are frozen by the federal government. Your real estate fund is a crime scene. Your son is in a jail cell. And you are currently standing in a suit that you can no longer afford to dry clean. The only reason you are not in handcuffs right now is because Harrison forged your signature on the secondary wire transfers to shield you. But make no mistake, you have absolutely nothing left." Richard opened his mouth to argue, but the words died in his throat. He looked past me, watching an auditor place a yellow sticker on the grand piano in the main foyer. The fight completely drained out of him. The patriarch of the family, the man who had demanded absolute obedience and respect, suddenly looked like a frail, terrified old man. He slumped down onto the edge of a stone planter, burying his face in his hands. That was when my mother finally broke. Patricia had been standing near the entrance, frozen in a state of absolute shock. But when she saw a female auditor carrying a stack of barcode stickers, heading up the grand staircase toward the master bedroom, the reality of her situation finally pierced through her delusion. "No." Patricia gasped, her voice shrill and panicked. "No, you cannot go up there. My jewelry is up there. My clothes, my bags. You cannot take my things." She tried to run after the auditor, but her heavy sapphire gown caught under the heel of her shoe. She tripped, falling hard onto the polished marble floor. She did not try to stand back up. Instead, she crawled the last few feet toward me, her perfectly styled hair falling in messy strands across her tear-stained face. She reached out and grabbed the fabric of my suit trousers, clutching me with a desperate, crushing grip. "Olivia, please," Patricia sobbed, looking up at me with wild, terrified eyes. "Please, sweetheart, stop this. I am begging you. Do not let them take my things. Do not take my home." I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life telling me I was a disappointment. The woman who had thrown my suitcase into the snow just so her favorite son could have a temporary office. "Get up, Patricia," I said coldly, not moving an inch. "Stop humiliating yourself." "I cannot lose this house," she cried, tears ruining her expensive makeup, leaving dark streaks down her cheeks. "Where will we go? We have no money. Our friends will completely abandon us. You know how society works, Olivia. If we lose this house, we are nothing. We will be laughingstocks." "That is not my problem," I replied. "You cannot be this cruel," she wailed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings of the terrace. "We are your parents. I am your mother. I carried you for 9 months. We raised you. We put a roof over your head. You have to remember family blood, Olivia. You have to show mercy. We are blood." I looked at her hands gripping my clothes, then met her hysterical gaze. My expression was completely devoid of sympathy. "Family blood," I repeated softly, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Did you remember family blood last week, when you ordered me to pack my bags in the middle of a blizzard? Did you remember family blood when you stood on that porch wrapped in a cashmere shawl and told me to call an Uber because I was no longer useful to you?" Patricia choked on a sob, shaking her head frantically. "We did not mean it," she pleaded. "We were just stressed. Harrison was under so much pressure. We made a mistake. You did not make a mistake, I corrected her, my voice turning to ice. You made a choice. You chose Harrison. You always chose Harrison. You watched him steal you, watched him lie, and you funded his delusions while you treated me like a parasite. And when I finally became successful, you tried to steal my company in a courtroom. You went on national television and told the world I was a monster. You tried to ruin my reputation just to protect your criminal son. I reached down and forcibly peeled her fingers off my suit. I took a deliberate step back, severing the physical connection between us. Remember what you told me that night on the porch? I asked, my voice ringing with absolute terrifying clarity. You said you were throwing me out as tough love. You said you were doing it to make me independent. You said I needed a fire lit under me so I could learn to stand on my own 2 feet. Patricia stared at me, her mouth trembling, unable to form a single word. Well, I continued, gesturing to the massive estate behind me. Look at how well your method worked. I am completely independent. And now it is your turn. Consider this my gift back to you. I am lighting a fire under you, Mother. It is time for you and Dad to learn how to stand on your own 2 feet. I turned away from her and looked at the 2 private security guards standing near the entrance. They immediately stood at attention. I pulled back the sleeve of my jacket, looking down at my luxury watch. The second hand ticked forward with a quiet, relentless rhythm. I looked back at my parents. My father was still sitting on the stone planter, staring into space. My mother was still kneeling on the marble floor, completely shattered. You have exactly 15 minutes, I announced, my voice echoing across the terrace with absolute authority. Patricia gasped, looking up at me in horror. 15 minutes for what? To pack, I said simply. You can each take 1 standard-sized suitcase. You may pack essential clothing, toiletries, and basic necessities. You are not permitted to take any jewelry, any designer accessories, any electronics, or any items of significant monetary value. The auditors will inspect your bags before you leave the premises. Anything that belongs to the estate stays with the estate. You cannot do this, Richard yelled, suddenly finding his voice again. He jumped up from the planter, his face red with a fresh wave of panic. You cannot evict us with 15 minutes' notice. We have rights. The law requires a 30-day eviction process. Not for a commercial foreclosure, I corrected him, reciting the exact legal terminology David had explained to me. Because you signed this property over to a shadow bank as commercial collateral for Harrison's business, it is no longer classified as a primary residential domicile. You waived your right to a standard eviction notice the moment your pen hit that contract. Legally, you are trespassing on corporate property. I could have you arrested right now, but I am being generous. I am giving you 15 minutes. That is impossible, Patricia screamed, pulling herself up from the floor. I cannot pack my life into 1 suitcase in 15 minutes. I looked at her, my eyes completely cold. You gave me less than 10. I turned to the head of my security detail. Escort them upstairs. Do not let them out of your sight. If they attempt to conceal any valuables, confiscate the bag entirely and escort them off the property with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Yes, ma'am, the security chief replied. He gestured to 2 of his men, who immediately stepped forward and flanked my parents. The countdown starts now, I said, looking right into my mother's eyes. I suggest you hurry. Patricia let out a guttural, agonizing wail. It was the sound of a woman watching her entire identity being ripped away. She turned and practically ran toward the grand staircase, her expensive gown tearing as she scrambled up the steps, completely terrified of running out of time. My father followed slowly behind her, his shoulders slumped, his spirit completely broken. He looked older, smaller, and entirely defeated. I stood alone on the terrace, surrounded by the flashing lights of the police cruisers and the quiet, efficient movements of the auditors. The night air was freezing, but I did not feel the cold. I watched the second hand on my watch tick forward, marking the final moments of my family's reign. The 15 minutes had begun. Down at the bottom of the driveway, the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers illuminated the interior of the vehicle where Harrison was currently trapped. He pressed his face against the cold glass of the rear window, his breath fogging the pain. He watched the massive white tents, the ones he had rented to solidify his billionaire facade, being methodically dismantled by the catering staff. The very staff he had tried to scam, the staff I had paid. Harrison leaned forward, testing the heavy steel handcuffs digging violently into his wrists. He looked through the wire mesh partition at the federal agent sitting in the driver's seat and tried to deploy his signature charm, the same charm he had used to steal millions from innocent people. "Officer, there is a massive misunderstanding here," Harrison pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. "I have powerful friends in this state. I can make sure you are heavily compensated if you just let me make one phone call from my personal cell phone. I can fix this. I just need to call my offshore broker." The agent adjusted his rearview mirror, looking at my brother with absolute disgust. "Your offshore accounts were seized 30 minutes ago, kid," the agent stated flatly. "You cannot even afford a public defender right now. The FBI has been building a wire fraud case on your real estate fund for 6 months, and your sister just handed us the final piece of the puzzle on a silver platter. You are facing 20 years in a federal penitentiary. Sit back and keep your mouth shut." Harrison slumped back against the hard plastic seat, the blood completely draining from his face. The golden child, the brilliant CEO, the beloved son, was finally completely powerless. He closed his eyes, tears of absolute terror leaking down his cheeks as the reality of his future set in. A few yards away on the manicured lawn, Naomi was standing next to a second federal investigator, shivering in the cool night air. She had just finished giving a detailed, frantic statement, throwing Harrison completely under the bus. She had eagerly handed over the passwords to his personal laptops, hoping her immediate cooperation would guarantee her federal immunity. She wrapped her arms tightly around her fake maternity dress, waiting for the agent to arrange a private ride for her so she could escape the humiliating scene. Suddenly, her cell phone rang. It was a custom ringtone she had assigned to her father, a prominent African-American state senator, whose political machine controlled the entire county. Naomi snatched the phone from her pocket, answering it with a desperate, relieved gasp. "Daddy, thank God you are calling," Naomi cried into the receiver. "You need to send the family lawyers to the estate immediately. Harrison has lost his mind. He is running a Ponzi scheme and the feds are here. I need an extraction right now." Her father did not offer words of comfort. His voice came through the speaker so loud and furious that the federal agent standing next to her actually stepped back to give her space. "I just got a call from the district attorney," her father roared, his voice trembling with pure rage. "Do you have any earthly idea what you have done tonight? You are implicated in a multi-million-dollar federal fraud case. But the financial crimes are not even the worst of it. The country club board just called your mother. The local news stations are already running the story." Naomi froze, her eyes widening in pure panic. "What story?" she stammered. "Everyone knows about your fake pregnancy," her father screamed. "The medical records leaked. Everyone knows you were caught getting cosmetic Botox injections while claiming you were carrying a high-risk child just to extort your sister-in-law on the internet. Do you know what this makes us look like? I built our family name over 4 decades of public service. I fought tooth and nail for our reputation in this community, and you destroyed it in a single afternoon because you married a con artist and decided to play a pathetic victim online. Daddy, please, I can explain everything." Naomi begged, tears streaming down her perfectly contoured face. "There is no explaining this, Naomi," he cut her off instantly. "I am in the middle of a highly contested re-election campaign. You are a massive political and legal liability. We are cutting all financial ties effective immediately. Do not call this house again. Do not speak to the press. Do not expect my lawyers to save you from federal prison. You are completely on your own." The line went dead with a sharp click. Naomi pulled the phone away from her ear, staring at the blank screen in absolute horror. She looked around the massive estate, realizing she had no car, no money, and no powerful family left to protect her. She dropped her phone onto the grass and collapsed to her knees, weeping hysterically into her hands. The federal agent simply wrote something down on his notepad, turned his back, and walked away. Inside the grand mansion, a completely different kind of destruction was unfolding. I followed my security chief up the sweeping marble staircase and stood silently in the hallway, just outside the master bedroom. The heavy mahogany door was wide open, revealing the absolute chaos inside. Two of my security guards stood by the doorframe with their arms crossed, watching my parents tear their luxurious room apart. My mother was frantically pulling designer dresses from her massive walk-in closet, tossing them haphazardly onto the California king bed. She grabbed a heavy velvet jewelry box and tried to shove it deep into the bottom of her small leather suitcase. One of the security guards stepped forward instantly. "No jewelry, ma'am," the guard ordered, snatching the velvet box directly from her hands and tossing it onto the dresser. The instructions were clear. Only basic necessities. Patricia let out a scream of pure, unadulterated frustration. "Richard, do something," she yelled at my father, who was standing by his own closet, blankly holding a pair of slacks. "Tell them to get out of our room. Tell them to leave my things alone." Richard threw the slacks onto the hardwood floor and turned on her, his face twisting with sudden venom. "Tell them to get out," he repeated mockingly, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Are you insane, Patricia? They own the house. We have absolutely nothing left, and it is entirely your fault." My mother stopped packing, staring at him in genuine shock. "My fault?" she shrieked, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "You are the patriarch of this family. You are the one who signed the deed to our home over to a shadow bank so your precious son could play CEO. You lost our home because you are a weak gambling fool who did not even bother to read the loan documents." Richard stepped toward her, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. "I did it because you demanded it," he roared, the veins bulging in his neck. "You could not stand the thought of Harrison failing. You needed him to be a billionaire so you could show him off at the country club luncheons. You pushed him. You spoiled him. You turned him into a criminal because nothing was ever enough for you." Patricia slapped him across the face. The sharp crack echoed violently in the large bedroom. "You coward," she spat, her eyes wild with hatred. "You always blame me. If you had just managed the family money properly, we would not be packing cheap sweaters into a single suitcase like refugees. And if you had not let Harrison convince you to throw Olivia out into the snow last week, she would never have bought our debt. You handed her the weapon she used to destroy us." Richard grabbed her wrist, pushing her back against the bed. "She is your daughter too," he yelled. "You are the one who told her to call an Uber. You are the one who treated her like trash her entire life." They stood inches apart, breathing heavily, completely consumed by their hatred for one another. The perfect high society marriage was exposed for exactly what it was. It was nothing but a fragile, toxic illusion, built entirely on money and status. And without the money, there was only poison left. They had spent decades presenting a united front to tear me down, but the moment they faced real consequences, they tore each other apart. The security chief looked down at his watch, his expression completely bored by their domestic dispute. "Time is up," he announced loudly, stepping into the room. "Zip the bags right now, you are leaving." My parents did not argue. The fight had completely drained the last remaining ounces of fight from their bodies. They zipped their single suitcases in silence and walked out of the bedroom, their heads bowed in total defeat. I stood in the hallway and watched them pass. They did not look at me. They could not look at me. They walked down the grand staircase for the very last time, their footsteps heavy and incredibly slow. I followed them out onto the outdoor terrace. The police cruisers were finally pulling away, carrying Harrison off to the county lockup. The federal agents were finishing their final sweep of the grounds, placing evidence seals on the doors of the guest house. The caterers had completely packed up the tents and the crystal chandeliers. The grand charity gala had been entirely erased, leaving only the cold, harsh reality of the night. The lead asset auditor was waiting for my parents at the bottom of the marble steps. She opened their suitcases, conducting a swift, ruthless inspection. She found a solid gold Rolex hidden inside one of my father's rolled-up socks and a diamond tennis bracelet tucked into the lining of my mother's makeup bag. The auditor confiscated both items without a single word, tossing them onto a nearby table before pointing toward the open iron gates. "You are cleared to leave the property," the auditor stated coldly. My parents stood on the gravel driveway looking around the empty estate in total confusion. "Where are our cars?" Richard asked, his voice trembling as he looked toward the empty valet staging area. The auditor did not even look up from her digital tablet. "Your vehicles were leased under Harrison's corporate fund. They have been seized as federal evidence. You will have to walk." Patricia let out a quiet, broken sob. She looked down at her expensive designer heels, realizing she was about to walk miles in the freezing dark. I walked over to the buffet table where a single catering staff member was packing up the remaining glassware. I picked up a crystal flute and gestured for him to pour. He opened a fresh bottle of vintage champagne, the crisp pop echoing perfectly in the quiet night. I took a slow sip, the cold, dry liquid burning pleasantly against my throat. I stood at the top of the marble stairs holding my glass and looked down at my parents. They gripped the handles of their cheap suitcases, shivering in the wind. Without a single word, they turned their backs to the mansion and began the long, humiliating walk down the dark gravel driveway. They stumbled in their expensive shoes, shrinking into the shadows until they were completely swallowed by the night. I took another sip of my champagne, savoring the absolute silence of my new estate. The toxic family that had tried to bury me was gone. The dominoes had finally fallen, and the board was completely cleared. 6 months later, the sprawling Connecticut estate looked entirely different. The grand colonial mansion with its marble columns and crystal chandeliers was gone. I had hired a demolition crew the week after the charity gala to tear the entire structure down to its foundation. In its place now stood a sleek, modern building made of glass and steel, surrounded by newly planted trees and vibrant spring flowers. I stood on the front steps, holding a pair of oversized ceremonial scissors. A bright red ribbon stretched across the double-glass doors. A crowd of journalists, local leaders, and aspiring entrepreneurs cheered as I sliced through the ribbon. I was officially opening the Apex Innovation Center, a fully funded technology incubator specifically designed to provide capital resources and mentorship to underprivileged female founders. Charles Montgomery, the elderly investor my brother had tried to scam, stood in the front row. He was now one of the primary board members of my legitimate philanthropic foundation. He smiled warmly and clapped as the doors opened, welcoming the first class of young women into the facility. As I watched them walk into the building, their faces lit up with hope and ambition. I thought about the people who used to occupy this land. The federal justice system had not been kind to my brother. The trial was remarkably swift, largely because of the mountain of encrypted data I had handed over to the FBI. Facing decades behind bars, Harrison took a plea deal. The Golden Child was currently serving a 15-year sentence in a minimum security federal penitentiary. He traded his tailored tuxedos for a standard-issue khaki uniform and his luxury leased cars for a highly regulated schedule. Naomi did not fare much better. She successfully filed for divorce, but it did not save her. Her powerful political family made good on their promise. They completely cut her off legally and financially, distancing themselves from the massive public scandal she had caused. Stripped of her social standing and drowning in legal fees, Naomi was currently dodging relentless creditors. Last I heard, she was living in a tiny studio apartment across the state, quietly selling off her collection of designer handbags online just to keep the lights on. And then there were my parents. The transition to reality was brutally hard on Richard and Patricia. With their bank accounts seized and their credit completely destroyed, they were forced to rent a cramped one-bedroom apartment in a noisy industrial suburb. The country club formally revoked their membership, and their high society friends stopped returning their calls entirely. To survive, they had to do something they had not done in decades. They had to work. My father, who used to boast about his financial ability, was now operating a cash register at a local hardware store. My mother, who used to parade around in custom gowns from Paris, was currently working the customer service desk at a discount retail chain folding clothes for minimum wage. They reached out to me exactly once. A handwritten letter arrived at my corporate office a month ago begging for forgiveness and asking for a small monthly allowance to help them get back on their feet. I did not reply. I simply fed the letter through my paper shredder. Forgiveness requires genuine change, and I was not interested in funding their comfort, ever again. I stepped away from the cheering crowd and walked down the pathway toward my waiting car. The spring breeze felt clean and refreshing. For 33 years, I was the scapegoat of my family. I was the one they blamed for their stress, the one they used for their convenience, and the one they discarded the second I was no longer useful. But what they never understood is that being the scapegoat is actually a superpower. When a toxic family constantly pushes you away, they are accidentally teaching you how to survive alone. They are teaching you how to build your own strength, how to navigate the dark without their help, and how to become entirely self-sufficient. They thought throwing me out into a blizzard would break me. Instead, it set me completely free. Establishing firm, uncompromising boundaries was the hardest thing I ever had to do, but it was the only way to protect my peace and build a life that was authentically mine. Have you ever had a family member try to claim your success as their own? How did you shut them down? Drop your story in the comments, like and subscribe if my journey resonated with you, and join our community for more stories about overcoming toxic environments to build the life you truly deserve. Until next time, remember that your boundaries are your strongest armor. Keep building, keep fighting, and never let anyone make you feel like a guest in your own life. The most profound lesson hidden within the wreckage of a toxic family dynamic is that being cast as the scapegoat is rarely a reflection of your actual worth. Rather, it is a desperate mechanism used by broken people to avoid facing their own failures. When you are continuously marginalized, belittled, and expected to carry the emotional and financial burdens of those who refuse to take accountability, you are unknowingly being handed the ultimate survival toolkit. The isolation forces you to build an unbreakable foundation of self-reliance, teaching you how to navigate the darkest storms without a safety net. Olivia's journey perfectly illustrates that the moment you stop seeking validation from a system designed to exploit you is the exact moment you reclaim your absolute power. Blood relations do not grant anyone a free pass to disrespect your boundaries, drain your resources, or weaponize your kindness. True independence requires the courage to walk away from the illusion of a perfect family, and the strength to let the consequences of their own destructive actions catch up with them. You do not owe your success, your peace, or your future to the people who only remembered you when they needed to be rescued from their own poor choices. By severing the ties of toxic loyalty, you clear the debris, making room to build a life founded on authentic respect, uncompromising boundaries, and undeniable self-worth. It is a painful realization, but ultimately a liberating one. Sometimes the greatest gift a toxic family can give you is the final push out the door, forcing you to realize you never actually needed them to thrive. If you have ever had to cut ties to protect your peace, share your story of breaking free in the comments below and subscribe to join our empowered community.